don't know Hong Kong, then you'll probably assume it's all concrete jungle, but anyone that's lived here for a while will understand that can be further from the truth. 40% of it is national park, 30% is countryside, leaving just the remaining 30% as the concrete jungle. Most of us that live here realise that the countryside is actually one of the best features of Hong Kong. Making it even better, there's 263 outlying islands to explore. I've been very lucky to live here for nearly 20 years. In the summer of 2023 I took advantage of the hilly terrain to train for a bikepacking trip I was planning later in the year. There's loads of tracks and roads that are really quiet to do this training on. Because it's so hilly, it's really easy to go out for a ride and do 1,000–2,000 metres of elevation. It doesn't actually look steep here, but I promise you this hill is quite steep. To enhance my training, I wore a face mask a lot of the time on shorter rides up to about 2 hours, which restricts your breathing. That helps increase your lung capacity and simulates altitude. I'm lucky that behind where we live is the highest peak in Hong Kong that's called Tai Mo Shan. That means foggy hill, as it's often shrouded in a blanket of fog. It's a really tough ride, especially in the summer with the heat and humidity, where you can have temperatures in the low 30s and humidity up to 90%. So you've got to make sure you drink loads of water on the way up. I wish I'd actually counted how many times I've been up and down here. Regardless of how many times it was, I still really enjoyed the view each time I went up and down. As the road winds its way around the hill, you can see over to the east, the south and the west. You get quite different views of Hong Kong, which never get old. Despite doing all this training all summer, I was really not sure how it was going to prepare me for the trip I had planned, which was to cycle the Manali to Leh highway, which is just under 500 kilometres in the north of India, right up in the Himalayas. It crosses 5 of the highest motorable passes in the world. Getting to Manali itself was a bit of an adventure because there'd been the worst monsoon in many years in India. It washed a lot of the roads away, as you can see here. The main roads were blocked and you had to use these tiny little narrow roads to get up through the Himalayas to get to my starting point of Manali. When I arrived there, it was shrouded in cloud. A lot of nice pine forests, very green alpine scenery. The monsoon had officially finished now, so the rivers had dropped a lot of their water, but you could still see the size that it could get to at the peak of the monsoon. The clouds all looked quite foreboding on the eve of my start of my trip.
What made you go on this trip to India?
I think it was partly a practical side of it, that it's closer to where we live in Hong Kong than going all the way to Europe and America. But that probably wasn't the overriding reason. The overriding reason was that I wanted to do something more adventurous, go off to places that you don't often get to go to. So there's a lot more of those kind of places within Asia. Also, in terms of the area I chose, the Manali to Leh highway is very well known, very iconic within India. But outside of India, there's a lot fewer people that know about it. I first heard about it from a friend of mine who travelled in India and wrote to me when I was a lot younger
about all the different places, which was one of the reasons that inspired me to sort of travel 25-30 years ago. But I'd never actually got to Ladakh or Leh previously, so it also helped address that urge to go and see it. Although I've travelled in India a lot, both for work and for pleasure, I'd never been north of Delhi before, and this is right up in the north of India in the Himalayas.
In a lot of ways, this first day was the hardest out of all of them. That was largely due to the unknown of just how difficult it was or wasn't going to be, what the road conditions were going to be like, how I was going to deal with the altitude, the hours of riding, and the fact that it's mainly just going uphill the whole time. It also rained the whole of the day pretty much. I got sores on my legs from my trousers, which made me worry that kind of thing was going to continue. Luckily, the weather for the rest of the trip was really good, so I didn't have to worry about wearing the trousers. It was great to be able to actually get over Rotang Pass on that first day. I was very conscious that if I didn't make it across there, the whole idea of doing the whole trip in 6 to 8 days was put at risk, and there were fewer places to stay going up to Rotang Pass because there's a new tunnel that cuts out that first mountain range that most people take, but I thought that was going to be cheating. It's great to see these yaks just as I got over that first pass. They're massive animals, as you can see. Luckily they didn't seem too bothered with my presence. And finally a bit of downhill. Managed to get a good night's sleep and dry out all my clothes, and luckily the next day there was no sign of rain, and actually there was none for the rest of the trip. I'd planned to have a quieter route the second day. There wasn't any logical passes that I could go over, so got up a bit later and had a slow, more relaxing day to conserve my energy for the future days. I used a drone for a lot of these shots, obviously, and despite it being a real pain to get it all out, get it set up, and I'm no experienced drone pilot, so it took a real effort, and at the time I wasn't always in the best frame of mind to do it, because it's quite distracting from just getting on, but I'm really glad on reflection I did, because I think some of the drone shots give the best sense of what it actually looks and feels like to be there, rather than your phone on your handlebars.
How did you prepare for this trip?
I think that falls into sort of 2 or 3 different buckets. One is sort of planning the actual trip itself. In terms of that, I didn't want to think about it too much, because I think you can just go around too many times thinking about different options. I had a couple of ideas. I settled on this one pretty quickly. Then you hone in on that and you research the route, the distance, how long it will take, the logistics of getting to the start and the end point. Then you start thinking about your equipment, what you're going to take, balancing both the weight that you'll carry, so making sure you've got everything you need, but also making sure that it's not so heavy that that's going to be difficult when you're cycling. So trying to strike that balance, and I think I pretty much got it this time, compared to Mongolia, where I did another trip and I'd probably taken too much stuff then. This trip was much lighter because I knew that I didn't need to buy much food. I knew that with this route there was places that you could eat at along the way, so I just needed snacks, so that was easier. So that's looking at the equipment, planning the route, and then the other part is the physical training. So I tried to cycle as much as possible in Hong Kong. I researched it and bought a face mask which restricts the oxygen, which is as close as you can get to simulating high altitude exercise. I was quite surprised actually. In a lot of ways it did help. It's not 100% simulation because you're not getting the headaches, you're not getting the sleep deprivation, but in terms of just needing to breathe much heavier and that training for your lungs and your lung capacity, I think it really helped. I tried to cycle and do similar distance and elevation within a day at the weekend that would be comparable to what I do in India. It's very tough in Hong Kong in the summer though, with the heat and the humidity. I just physically couldn't wear that face mask for sort of 8-10 hours on the bike. I tended to use that for shorter trips of a couple of hours. So it's really sort of planning your exercise routine, and then as you get closer, looking at your diet as well. Avoid alcohol for the few weeks leading up to it. Make sure you're eating more carbs, eating healthily, getting enough sleep. So I think that was really most of the preparation. A strange thing, I think a real milestone when you're going to do something like this is booking the flight. Once you book the flight, that is really the moment when you know you're going to go. So that's the big milestone. Everything else can fall before that or after it in terms of planning, but once you've booked that flight, you know you're going. Namaste. Hello, sheep. Namaste.
Why did you do this trip?
I think philosophically, when you look back on your life, maybe it's a bit morbid, but I want to look back and have done several very different things, whether it's academic, whether it's career, whether it's family, whether it's adventure stuff, whether it's, you know, multitude of other things. And I wanted to pick something that I genuinely didn't think I'd 100% complete, because if you genuinely think, oh yeah, 100% I'll do it, it's not going to be challenging enough. So there was a very clear thought that I had that I may not complete it, and thinking about how I'd get to the end point if I couldn't complete it. You know, maybe mechanical failure, maybe I get ill, maybe I'm not fit enough. You know, maybe there's landslides and the road gets blocked, maybe there's bad weather, long list of reasons. I'd set myself 6 to 8 days to complete it. 6 days is pretty quick from looking at what other people have done. 8 days is pretty comfortable, but as long as everything goes smoothly. I couldn't do more than 8 days because I had to fly back home. So if I knew at any point I wouldn't complete it within 8 days, I knew I'd have to hitch to get to the end, or arrange transport to get to the end.
What was the most difficult part of your journey?
It varies. Physically difficult. As I was cycling day after day, it obviously gets more and more difficult, and you overlay the altitude sickness on top of that, and it's one of the side effects of that is that you don't sleep as well. So you're doing a lot of physical exercise, you're not sleeping as well, and you're doing it day after day, so you're getting more and more tired as you go along. So the last day was also the longest I'd cycled, which was about 175 kilometers, which is about 100 miles, and it was over the highest pass as well. So that was physically the most difficult. But I think actually what was more difficult than that is more the evenings, because you're on your own, you're tired, you may not be able to have a wash, you don't have many changes of clothes with you, and that's when you're sort of on your own, you're not doing anything as such, and then you start to think, oh, you know, I could have been on an island in Thailand with my family. Why did I choose to do this? Why did I choose to do this? So I think mentally it was more difficult than physically, and mentally, you know, sometimes you're feeling really good, other times you're really not feeling good. So it is quite a roller coaster ride in that respect. So I'd say mentally in the evenings was the most difficult.
This next section was called Garter Loops, which is quite infamous for people that have cycled this route, and I think I'd built it up in my head that it was going to be much more difficult than it was. Strangely enough, having 21 bends to go round actually helped, because you could count them down so you knew how far you had to go, and that helped just keep me going. This next section of the ride is one of my favourite parts, because you really felt like you'd got right up on top of the Himalayas and you were looking down on it much more than actually looking upwards all the time. And you got, as you can see here, huge long vistas. It was really easy to ride with this scenery. And then it gets up onto a plain that's called the Mori Plains, and it was welcome relief to just have some relatively flat roads for 20-30 kilometres to cycle along, and they were empty. I don't think I saw another car, or certainly not another cyclist. I was listening to audiobooks as I went along some of the time, and I think at this point I was right into the middle of Lord of the Rings. It was a great spot to listen about Middle Earth and Mordor with all of this open, really quiet, remote scenery. I was conscious as I went through here that I still had the highest pass to go over, so as much as I was relaxed into listening to the audiobook, that was partly on my mind as well. Difficult to breathe.
Out of all the passes, this one really seemed like you were up above most of the mountains and looking down over them. Once I finished and got over the pass, the final valley that you go through was really beautiful. You start to get more greenery, more Buddhist stupas as you went along, small villages. The rock colour changed, as you can see here. It's starting to get very red and brown colours against the green and the blue of the sky. I really enjoyed this part of the ride. This was another rare part of the journey where you're actually close to the mountains again. This was actually day 5 of my trip, so I was really proud to be able to do it in 5 days when I'd hoped to do it between 6 and 8. The last day was a long day though, with about 175 kilometres cycled, including that highest pass.
What was the most beautiful part of this trip?
It starts with very alpine type scenery with a lot of pine forests, waterfalls, very green. It rained most of the first day, pretty much all of it. But then as you go over each of the 5 passes, each time it gets drier and drier and drier, so the scenery changes. But ultimately, for me, the most spectacular scenery was around Leh. And the reason for that is that you're right up in the Himalayas. It's a very dry desert. You get long vistas, but you have the Indus River running through it, which irrigates the land on the floodplains. So you have all of the cedar trees and all of the crops growing. Then in the background you've got all of the mountains with the snow at the top of them, the snow on the peaks. And then also, because of the Tibetan influence, you get the monasteries on top of the hills, which just looks stunning. When the Chinese invaded Tibet, the Tibetans, and predominantly the Buddhist monks, fled to the west until they could find safety. Once they got outside of China, the first place they came to was the Ladakh region of India, where they were safe and where they've ended up staying. A lot of people say that now Ladakh is more traditionally Tibetan than Tibet is.
Are you gonna put in a blooper reel?
Blooper reel? You want me to?
I don't mind.
Maybe I didn't make any mistakes. Oh, okay. that look just said, of course you made mistakes, Daddy. Do you think I made mistakes?